Wednesday evening featuring Texaco at the Met will not be broadcast tonight, inasmuch as it's never broadcast at night. But hello to you people getting this on TV. And let me say right quick, when we're taping these, we're doing them an hour at a time, and we're informed that in some cities on the cable, they're only showing the second half, and so that you won't feel too lost. The first half is normally taken up by reading what's known as the Kairos. They're one-liners and stories, little parables and etc., and people write down what they would like to hear an additional comment regarding, and I get the list, and then after we do that, I look over the list and see if there's something that Kairos, who's standing off stage, would like for me to say. I just wanted to clear that up. If any of you still feel confused in TV land, for $29.95, we will not send you a program guide and viewer's study outline. So here we go. And so as not to be completely lost also, the ones I redo, or comment on, I'll reread. Some of them, every now and then, periodically, Kairos tells me to decline the offer because some of them were intended just to be read, and that was it. And Kairos said, when someone else tells you what works, they're simply manning the phones at the funeral home. Well, we're back to the general area. I could say that for ordinary people to think, they must have some external source of reference, the easy one being such things as Holy Scripture. But it also comes down to the people attempting to translate Holy Scripture, for instance, or psychologists, geologists, a social observer, a critic, someone attempting to give you advice, which real advice, when it gets down to it, in the human sense, is normally of a secondary nature. It may appear to be primarily based, such as someone says, I am a doctor, and I want to give you my strongest advice that everyone who drinks alcohol should stop. Well, that would sound as though you're down to the primary level. But do note, were it not for the secondary world, men would not have invented alcohol, for instance. The point being, all forms of advice end up being of a cultural, civilized, secondary, intellectual nature, even when they appear to be primarily based. That is, very crude, basic, and physically based, such as, don't overeat. If man did not have a secondary world, may I suggest to you, he would not overeat. It's why you, when we get to creatures on this planet that only have a primary world, for instance, you do not see overweight hippos. You do not see fat pigs, any more than you see pigs drinking and then driving. Go back to alcohol. Making a real hard attempt to get back to the subject. When someone tells you what works, advice, it is always, if you can see it, is always of a secondary nature. There is really no such thing as primary advice. There's not advice about primary affairs, even though it may appear to be, such as I was bringing up the example. But it would not be done unless man had a secondary life. So when someone else tells you what works, they're simply manning the phones at the funeral home. That is, when someone gives you advice, when someone says, listen to me, and it might be, if you're ordinary, they might be wired up in such a way that, let us say, they were using institutionalized religion. They were saying, I'm telling you what you should do on the basis that God told me, or I'm translating the Quran, the Holy Scripture. They're always telling you something that is outdated. And it's not an attack on religion. It wouldn't be an attack if somebody was giving you psychological advice, saying, well, here's what Freud said, here's what Jung said. They are speaking to you from the grave. That's what all advice is. That's what all When someone tells you what works, the only reason that someone can say what works is because everyone who's used it, or those that used it and invented it, are dead. They've got to be dead either literally or they're dead, that is, that the advice is no longer of any efficacy. It is no longer potent. And that is why it is now advice. Because if it was still alive and could be used, it would not be in the realm of advice. May I attempt to wrap it up? Please do. At the ordinary level, any advice you get, no matter from the source is not the point. It's not that we're attacking religion or psychology. Any advice at the secondary level is meaningless. That's the most objective way to put it to a revolutionist. But to go back to this kind of Kairut, he was trying to get your attention in a certain way. All advice is outdated. I mean, even if you can use it, even if it sounds correct, and who sane among us would deny, would say, well, it's good advice to say don't overeat, or it's good advice to say you shouldn't drink and drive. We're not saying it's not, but the advice is dead. Who needs such advice? I mean, you could hear it and think that is good advice, but I've got to ask you now, some of you look like sane men and women in a special sense. What kind of person is it that needs advice? Let's assume that they're over, 8 or 9 years old. What kind of person needs advice? Let's say that you're 15 or 20. What kind of person needs advice for someone to say, you shouldn't drink too much? And someone goes, let me write that down. You should not eat more than you need. Wow, that's good advice. Plus, the person thinks, and didn't they introduce him as having 3 degrees? Think about it. Who needs advice? Is that plain enough? Because all advice at one level is meaningless, but pushed a little bit further to take a more complex view, it's more than meaningless, it's insulting. But don't look at the person that gave you advice. It should be insulting to you that someone says, whatever you do, I plead with you people. I can't run your morals, I can't live your life, but listen to me, people, says some spokesman. Have fun, and if you do drink, at least don't drive, because your reflexes, alcohol affects the brain. I mean, don't fool yourself. And people listen and go, God, that's meaningful. When I say it's insulting, don't say that he insulted you. What kind of BB brain needs someone, pardon the technical jargon, I didn't mean to lapse. What kind of person needs advice such as that? And if you get past that point of thinking, well, you just picked out something foolish, pick out any advice. Don't get mad. Don't beat up on your neighbor. Don't take drugs. Pick out any advice, no matter how sound it is, and then ask yourself, if I took that seriously and thought, it is a boon, it is to my benefit that I heard this advice. Right quick, forget the advice and the source, because it's always a funeral home. It's always a voice from the dead. Look at you right quick and think, well, you silly, simple son of a bitch. You need advice? And then, of course, I guess check, make sure that you are over 7 or 8 years old. And if you are, and Kairut said, to compensate for his headaches, one man set his feet on fire. Moral, the intellect ain't nobody's fool. Well, I could be wrong, but to me that's just plain as hell. All right. Well, we can take it to, in a 3-dimensional world, run as this one is, polarized energy. Nothing weird, nothing mystical, just not normally considered. If you will assume that Kairut didn't mean this literally, although it could happen, to compensate, we picked out a physical, plain picture. One man has headaches, so what does he do? He shoots himself in the foot. Puts corn plasters in his shoes. And at first you can laugh. or think it's silly. But think about it. How does the mind operate? Well, here you are drunk again. You've been arrested for the 3rd time this year and wrecked your car. And suddenly you hear a man say, "Friends, I used to be out here having fun, just like you people, and drinking, but I'm telling you, no matter how strong you are, no matter what kind of shape you're in, no matter how long you've been drinking, you cannot drive an automobile with the same kind of manual dexterity after alcohol as you can without it." And you go, uh-huh. That's meaningful. That's the same thing. Putting in corn plasters in your shoes when you're suffering from bad eyesight, from headaches, is you've taken the other end of what amounts to the spectrum of sorts. That a man, it's attempting, it's said to compensate, but no way to look at this. A man's got a headache, so to cure it, what does he do? He massages his feet. That makes as much sense, and it is a reality, a comment on reality of the way the mind works, which I guess is why he stepped out of it. Karuk put in the moral, the intellect ain't nobody's food. See, that was, I guess, to kind of make up, because he figured some of you would laugh at that, the first part. Do I have to give a withal? If the intellect was a fool, what would happen? Back to this one. All right, if a person had a headache, a person's thinking a certain way, a person has a fear of beavers, a person has a fear of wigs, a person is a francophile, is afraid of a left-wing French person who looks like a rodent that swims. He's trying to cure a certain fear. You're trying to cure a certain kind of stupidity. You're trying to cure a certain lacking. People, that's why they go to religion, that's why they go to a psychiatrist, go to a doctor, go to the racetrack, go drink. They're attempting to set their feet on fire to cure a headache. But if, go back to the moral, the intellect ain't nobody's fool. If it was a fool, what would it do? It would do what you would normally think it would do. If it had a headache, screw all this stuff, what would it do? Take an aspirin. Huh. We rest our case. And Karut said, some lungs told a heart, hey, feelings are gonna last forever, so just forget it. We could, I assume, if I had the energy, talk forever, point out to you forever, all the way from Holy Scriptures to earliest cave paintings, right up until today, psychology, religion, sociology. There is a continuing, under many guises, running commentary / question / complaint that we could all be in better psychological shape were it not for certain uncontrollable, unsavory, especially uncontrollable, what? Beavers, no. Sorry. Nice try. Passions. That we could all be more intellectual. That we could all understand more about life were it not for these unholy little burglars, these little interlopers that we have in us known as human emotions. Which by and large is what religions and psychology seem to be about, is to stamp out most of the little boogers. This is another one. May I speak for Cox? Well, he's still not here. I assume I can speak for him. I guess he went to the bathroom. That he kind of cut through 6,000 years of history, recorded history on this fine planet. Instead of talking about people and poets and people praying to gods and spirits, he just went down to a good primary level, down to a good hormonal level. Some lungs told a heart, hey, feelings are going to be around forever, so just forget it. Kyrie could have done this. He could have said that a heart told a brain. Yes, that'll help. Not a cure, not a treatment. Let me put it another way. Not a treatment, but closer to a cure. That is, not saying, well, what I need to do is in some way affect some remedial attention on my emotions. Tinker with them. Repair them. Patch them up. Get a little hot tar. Maybe call in your brother-in-law who's either a psychiatrist or a roofer. This basis, doing it, some of you seem to get it in a different way. A heart told a brain feelings, but you could also look as certain primary spins put on one's hormones. Feelings are going to be around forever, so forget it. Yes, but that's not as much fun. That is not as time-consuming as it is going to confession, going to see a psychiatrist, or, for those of you that like to save the big bucks, simply, it's not as time-consuming or as interesting as worrying about it. Working through it. Wherever the lady says, pulling out this little wounded, pissed off child in me. And having to watch some kind of PBS program. And this Kyrie was kind of like, pull the little sucker out, you know. Maybe say, hello, how are you? And kick him in the ass and forget about it. I don't know, that's kind of what I made of it, and you asked for my comment, that's it. I could be wrong. You get paid extra for understatement. I think some of you people write down these just to see if I'll actually say anything. Or put another way, I don't take this personally or think any of you are sarcastic or cynical, but some of these, you have got to write it down just on the basis that you can't believe that there's anything that I could say that would make any sense or any kind of pertinence. And Kyrie said, just to himself, one rebellious sort said, while I may appear to be unassuming on the outside, internally I am vainglorious enough that I wouldn't think of thinking what somebody else has already thought, even if it would make my nose an inch shorter, my jaw straight, and my whacker 5 inches longer. I think the beginning and the end probably threw somebody. Making my nose an inch shorter and my schmuck 5 longer. It's in the middle. Vainglorious, a good common term, but consider we're saying a rebellious sort, so I'm assuming, aren't you, that Kyrie means something a little more than just a run-of-the-mill peacock-brained hormonal person. It'd be a kind of secret, because nobody would know it. Rebellious kind of vainglory, that is, I'd be damned. And it's not a challenge, it's not showing off, especially, since it's secret, you can't show off. That I would think what somebody else has already thought. That is, I may be hard up for a hobby, but I'll be damned if I'm going to spend more time talking to somebody at the funeral home. Now, I don't care what their name is. I know some of them I caught and they say, hello, Aristotle speaking. Hello, Confucius speaking. Hello, Karen Horney speaking. They're all in the funeral home. I mean, that's their business. Was a short nose worth that? I don't know. You'll have to ask yourself. Well, I'll read this one. A chap deep in the bowels of the Royal Library says that after a lifetime of reading, study, and reflection, he has it, quote, all figured out except for one question, which is, what the hell is going on? Another one, I'm sure somebody wrote down the wrong page number because I know that no one can assume there's anything left to be said after that. A certain scientific organization recently contacted our show to say that they found it disturbing, quoting their letter, apparently, for us, this show to insinuate there could be as much exciting going on in one's head as there is in the universe itself. Every now and then, I hate to admit it, some of these I just don't know what to say. For those of you, the reason I keep looking down if you're interested is there's someone coaching me. Trying to watch the clock to get all these in. Well, Pavarotti has somebody doing down in the box. How come I don't have one? And Kyrut said, one mother's advice to her kids, city-bound in the mind, those of you who watch have to figure out what the old man and the kid means neurally. But this mother's advice was how few plans and even fewer explanations regarding their execution. What could be better if it came to it, assuming there was some benefit, whatever this meant metaphorically or pristine and directly? How few plans. I guess somebody could work on that. But, she says, have even fewer excuses regarding their execution. A tacit part, I might say, have even fewer excuses regarding their execution or lack thereof, which is the same thing. Would that not be a nice combination? Just two, even better than win, place, and show, but just those two together. Few plans, whatever number that would be, but even fewer comments regarding, fewer excuses, fewer explanations regarding the plans. What if you had it down to just two plans? Which would probably be a time saver right there, but if that were true, then you could only have one explanation. If you had fewer, that's the most you could have. What if you had it down to one plan? Then you'd have to have how many? The only, quote, sins of priests or, quote, crimes of kings would be, are you ready? Originality. What would be, and I'm using, or Kyrut's using priests and kings, of course, just as symbols, not even really metaphors. Beyond that, actual symbols for what ordinary people would think of as being the spiritual world and the quite mundane world. And that in both ways it's possible for men to transgress in some egregious fashion, which is what Kyrut meant by sins of priests. Something terrible could be done in that kind of imagined spiritual world. And then crimes of kings, that is, in the political, carnal, physical world, those who apparently are leading that world, the kings, for them to commit crimes, the very ones supposedly, the very ones entrusted with your safekeeping, the direction of the people. So what's the two things they could do? And of course, an ordinary mind say, well, sins of priests would be, like trying to seduce a parishioner's wife, stealing money from the poor box. And a king would be similar, him having someone executed so he could have his way with the recently departed's wife. By him taxing you just on the basis he didn't like the size of your nose. He didn't like you. That all of that would be crimes, sins. In the real sense, in the normal progression and the stability of the secondary world, the only sin is that which would interrupt, if it was possible in some meaningful, broad sense, would be an interruption of continuity, which would require what? Originality. That's the only crime. Think about it. They pop up in history. almost little footnotes, or there are asides that no one gives any particular notice there too. But figures, generals, kings, artists, thinkers, they're little knobs just barely sticking up in the fabric of continuity, and even in history, that somebody had to come along and kind of tap down Napoleon's head or Michelangelo's head, kind of got above. But it's always on the basis, they call it other things, of course. In religion, they can call it heresy. But what it amounts to is this: based upon the continuity of the time and the place, it was a form of originality. Too far afield from the mainstream of continuity. That is the only thing that life cannot allow. And Carut said, to do the impossible is simply to do the irrelevant. People like to dream of the impossible, right? People like to fly, they'd like to die and then get up and walk away. They'd like to close their eyes and see a number, then run down to the corner and play that number, and tomorrow it hit big. And the local number runner actually be in town tomorrow and pay you off. In other words, a miracle. In other words, the impossible. The impossible. To a revolutionist, in a broad sense, for you to see how life runs in a certain contiguous manner. To do the impossible. And now we're not talking about doing things like flying through the air, but for an individual to do the impossible is for him to do the irrelevant, which is what? To be original. For you to be able to think outside of that which is part of the fabric of the continuity of how everyone else is thinking. And to do so in such a way that it's not a crime to you. That is, it's not just you beginning to think like Elmer Fudd on Benny's. Well, it's always the point. It's not, in other words, it's not just to think the silly or the foolish on the basis of it being silly and foolish, because ordinary people can do that. And it periodically pops up in the world of art, and it even gets names like Dada. They're just people being silly and foolish. But that's not the point. Because out in life, that doesn't play. It doesn't do the people involved any good. It's always this kind of an attempt. There is a low-level, energetic basis that they're still trying to think originally. But it has to be someone who can do it, and it's meaningful to them. Well, we're out of time. Goodbye until we have time.